to BloombergQuint. As we get closer and closer to the budget, you're going to hear one word more and more, and that is infrastructure. We've spoken of an infrastructure push for many years on and off, but this time the imperative seems to be greater. It also seems to be more time-bound, given the nature of the economic conditions that we are seeing right now. But many questions remain. Anybody who's been in the economy for even a decade knows that infrastructure is easier said than done. And joining us to talk about whether we have the right conditions right now to move ahead with that push is Vinayak Chatterjee. Vinayak, very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us here on BloombergQuint.
Thank you. As you said, infrastructure is easier said than done. So at least on a Saturday morning, let's say it.
Okay.
Doing it Monday morning.
Whenever we play it out, I suspect the conditions will remain the same. But let me throw the first question to you. I think, right from April 2020, or maybe even before that, you said that what the economy needs right now is an infrastructure push. Now, there have been some noises made, some commentary has come in. But as we head to the budget, do you see that imperative as being greater than ever? Do you see that now perhaps some of the immediacy of that infrastructure push has come on?
Greater than ever I will throw your phrase back at you. And I think every interaction with the FM, every interaction with the PMO as happened yesterday with the economists, every interaction with any sector groups that are called for consultation, you will find that basically it is healthcare and infra as the two buzzwords for this budget. Healthcare is not on our agenda right now. I'm sure you'll pick it up with others. On infra, it is important to step back a little to paint the broader picture. See, the entire focus now is on a very rapid economic revival. Very simply put for your viewers, I think anybody who knows a smattering of economics knows that the revival of the economy basically depends on two engines firing: consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. Now, consumption expenditure is dependent on millions and millions of individual decisions. Whether I buy my next shirt or not, whether I buy my next air conditioner or shoe, or in the hands of the people towards the bottom of the pyramid. So consumption expenditure is not something which is a handle that you can pull. You can influence, but you cannot pull. The big elephant in the room, therefore, is investment expenditure. Now, because of the lower capital utilization, because of COVID and 1 or 2 years preceding that, private investment in non-infra capex, like building new factories, is unlikely to happen this fiscal. People are going to ramp up capacities. Which then brings us to the question that it is only infrastructure expenditure and public works which can actually be the driver of growth, which you can, a lever that you can pull should you have the will to pull it. And the government has clearly said that it has the will. So having said it, what does it mean? If you look at the budget figures for last year, the allocation for infra was 4.12 lakh crores. Okay, just keep that at the back of your mind. In the first 6 months of this fiscal, in capex by government, which is largely infra, fell by 27%. So in the next 6 months, it not only has to make up the decline of 27% in the first 6 months of this fiscal, but it has to increase further to reach the figure of 4.12, because this decrease of 27% was on last year's figure of 3.5 lakh crores. So this budget faces a double whammy. Now, it is also true that from October, November, December, the capex expenditure has picked up substantially, right? But whether that will be sufficient till 31st March to reach the budget estimates of 4.12 lakh crores, the jury is still out on that. Let's for a minute be positive and say that, we will meet the budget estimate of 4.12 lakh this crores, maybe miss it by a mile or two, but it's not so significant. The question is, what is going to be the budgetary outlay for this year? And how will the government and the union budget manage it? So remember this figure of 4.12 lakhs, which was the budget for last year or this year, right? My belief is that from all the smoke signals emanating out of North Block, my estimate is that the FM will probably relax the fiscal deficit by 2%, right? And allocate that to public works, infra building, and including infrastructure building in the healthcare sector, a large number of district hospitals, etc., etc. So broadly, the extra 2% relaxation of the fiscal deficit, which I think the FM will warm up to, will be justified by saying that that is not for unproductive expenditure, but it is for long-term capex and public works in infra, including healthcare. Now, what is 2% fiscal deficit mean? If you assume a 210 lakh crore our GDP, 2% is 4 lakh crores, right? So 4.12 of this year's budget estimate, add another relaxation of 2% relaxation of the fiscal deficit, gives us a budgetary outlay possibility of 8 lakh crores, right? Now, at one level, people who will be observing the budget will say, wow, FM has doubled the infrastructure outlay from 4 to 8. But let us pause here for a minute and ask ourselves, what is the annual outlay for infrastructure as announced by the government in the National Infrastructure Plan? That, if you recall, is 111 lakh crores over 5 years. So every year it is 20 lakh crores, 21 lakh crores.
Yeah.
Now see where the figures stand. Union budget has a maximum capacity with a 2% relaxation of the deficit to take the budget allocation to 8 lakh crores. But the need of the economy, and that is a very correct need. I have done a lot of back of the envelope calculations, and the 20 lakh crores broadly translates into about a 8-9% of GDP, which is what India requires. So no great debate on that. So the nation requires 20 lakh crores, which the government has endorsed and announced as a national infrastructure plan per annum. But the union budget at best can satisfy 8 out of the 20. Right? So this is where the discussion becomes interesting.
Yeah.
What is going to happen to the balance 12 lakh crores? Even assuming that our 2% deficit business is given. If it isn't, then the gap is larger. So this 12 lakh crores traditionally could have come from different sources. It would have come from off budget, basically off the union budget.
Yes.
It would have come from investments by public sector units.
Yeah.
It would have come from investment by private sector, PPP or otherwise. And it would have come from investments by states and urban local bodies.
Okay.
So broadly states, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's look at the capacity of these three areas. The PSUs certainly have a capacity to invest between the oil companies and NTPC and all the. My guess is that they can be pushed to raise resources and put in about 3 lakh crores, right? So let's say 8 becomes 11. Now that still leaves you with 9 lakh crores. Now 9 lakh crores between you and me, we can forget about the states in this coming fiscal.
Yeah.
Their budgetary position is extremely, extremely brittle.
Yeah.
So maximum ongoing works में 1-2 lakh आएगा. ठीक है? Then leaves the private sector. It is unlikely. There are no major projects happening now where private sector has been called upon to invest in infrastructure. There is an airport in North Goa with GMR. There are 1 or 2 BOT projects in highways. I can't greatly recall any major infra project where private sector is going to invest money, right? So broadly, let us say that between union government, PSUs, and some state and urban local bodies would be able to put in, let's be positive about it, 12 to 13 lakh crores. It leaves a major gap, 7 lakh crores, even for funding the national investment plan. Now, 7 lakh on a 20 lakh budget is a 33% gap. That is the challenge of this budget. And there is no way other than creating some off-budget institutions where this gap can be addressed. Which brings me to my next major point. If you see it, many of us for the last 3-4 years have been advocating a DFI, a developmental financial institution for funding infrastructure with an agenda vastly different from the past. We are asking for an institution that makes investments in nation building with the perspective of an economic rate of return and not a private sector IRR-based financial rate of return. After all, the investments made in Nehruvian times in Bhakra Nangal, Hirakud, irrigation, etc., have returns which can't be quantified in private sector IRR return on capital terms, right?
Yeah.
So that the immense satisfaction that people like us who observe infrastructure have is that the government has bought the idea.
Okay.
We understand from sources that, by the way, as a measure of disclosure, the government did set up a committee to recommend on a DFI. I have been a member of that committee.
Okay.
Chaired by Mr. Pankaj Jain, Additional Secretary DFS. There were many other people from IIM Ahmedabad and State Bank, etc. I was one of the members. And we actually pushed our concepts, which were well received by the government. The report is with the Finance Ministry. But the important position I understand now is that it is going to be one of the pillars of the budget announcement of creating of a national DFI. And I believe, I don't know whether right or wrong, but the information reaching us is that some kind of a bill is also being prepared because it is going to be created as an act of parliament. Right? So it is only logical that this gap will be made up by something that most of us have been clamoring for. And I must credit the government for having listened and digested, understood the point and moved on it. It's a matter of great satisfaction. So if we do get to see a DFI in this budget, I am sure that a substantive portion, we believe it will have a capital base infusion of 1 lakh crores. Now, technically, banks are allowed to leverage 9 times. So a 1 lakh crore can give you 10 lakh crores of, however, a sovereign, 100% sovereign owned DFI actually under an act of parliament has no limits. It can, in China, the China Development Bank once in its history had leveraged 75 times. So, because it's a sovereign. So therefore, the new DFI has the power to make up the gap which is emanating because of the inability of states and private sector. It has the ability. Now, this is the big picture and I'm going to stop there.
Okay. I'm going straight into the DFI question. Vinayak, why do we need a new institution? Firstly, what was NIIF set up for? What is NIIF not being able to do? What is India, there's an IFCI, there's a PFC, there's an REC, there is an IIFCL. This sort of desire, and this is not just from your end, desire for new institutions, banking institutions in India, in some ways, okay, we had a past, but we're not being able to fix the past, so let's leave it and let's start new. But I mean, what has changed? What will make a new institution more successful than an earlier institution?
I think on NIIF, I can address the issue clearly. The NIIF is the challenge. Remember, it is 51% owned by private investors.
Yes.
And they have put money into NIIF for a financial rate of return, not for reasons of any externalities or nation building or economic rate of return. So inherent in their structure is the fact that they must evaluate projects very clearly with the lens of a private sector investor in terms of securities, in terms of returns, etc. That certainly constrains their style or desire of the nation to use NIIF for development purposes, things which have an economic rate of return but cannot cross the IRR limit. So let's leave that aside for a time. It is in the architecture of the NIIF. Right or wrong, we can debate, but one can't blame NIIF for it. They're reacting within the constraints of their architectural mandate. Okay. Now, so far as the other institutions are concerned, the other institutions, I mean, there is a debate as to whether in the new DFI, some of the other financing institution arms of the government, like PFC, REC, HUDCO, NABARD, Indian Rail Fine, IRFC, have I missed out any? Broadly these.
IFCI.
IFCI is it's not a DFI. It's a okay. IFCI was also.
It's an NBFC, but it's
right. Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Now, whether they should be left to stand alone by themselves or not, or merged with this new entity. I think the current thinking within the government is to not muddy the waters too much because they are, extended arms of different ministries with very clear mandates. But broadly, they borrow from the market and lend onwards. Right?
Yeah.
Now, therefore, their existence depends on the margin they make, and PFC, RAC have actually played a stellar role in the private sector. Forget the DISCOM menace. But they have played a stellar role in the various, so has HUDCO in urban infrastructure. But their business model is largely to borrow from the market, pass it on by keeping a margin. Now, even there, the mandate to subserve a national cause, right? Let us say India wanted to set up a very major irrigation project, which has an economic rate of return or externalities over 30, 35 years, right? Or we wanted to, shall we say, fund a huge amount of border roads for reasons of national security, right? Or we want to spend, a huge amount of crores on water supply 24/7. Where it is very difficult to calculate a financial rate of return, and nobody is going to return cash within the next 1 or 2 years to repay those loans.
Yeah.
So these institutions inherently are a certain improvement over commercial banks, but are still constrained as not being able to subserve a larger national agenda. Now, most nations like India, which have grown from emergent market status, Brazil has a very vibrant and exemplary developmental financial institution. The China Development Bank is the one that created infrastructure in China, which we all rave about, right? So the new institution, like the old DFIs, this new institution will be under an act of parliament and will be entitled to raise resources and be provided a large number of benefits, which will allow it to have a capital cost far lower than conventional capital costs. That, to answer your question, is the rationale. It will be hemmed in by a lot of facilitative policy and legislative reliefs to enable it to have a fairly low cost of capital. It should be able to raise capital from developmental financial institutions the world over at very low rates, 40 years, 50-year money at low rates, like the 1 lakh crore for the bullet train. You know, it's a 60-year money with 0.5% interest and 10, 15-year moratorium. Your PFC RECs cannot do that. Right.
No, so explain this a bit further. Sorry. So what is the financing structure of this institution? These are whatever they borrow will be sovereign guaranteed, and then they will borrow from. It'll have an absolute sovereign guarantee.
Ideally, yes. See, I am not in a position to give straight answers to those questions because the exact financial structure, etc., are still under discussion.
No, I'm asking you hypothetically, what would work? What would work?
The broad expectation is yes, that with sovereign guarantee, India would be able to capitalize the huge positive outreach in international relations that Prime Minister Modi has achieved. There is no doubt on that. India's outreach to countries that have large pools of cheap capital is probably one of the best in recent history. And therefore, an institution like this, with the very positive external outreach that India enjoys now with relevant countries, should enable us to pick up very long-term developmental funds that these countries have, whether it's the Nordics or the Gulf or Canada or US or Australia, and fund this institution with long-term, low-cost developmental funds as distinct from commercial borrowings. But for those purposes, sovereign guarantee is essential. But for a 100% government-owned entity, which is the way it is being structured, that is like par for the course. I mean, it is assumed that guarantee given by the institution, which is 100% owned by the government, is a government guarantee. So therefore, the agenda is vastly different. It's a development agenda. It's an agenda for economic returns as distinct from commercial financial returns. And obviously makes up the infrastructure gap, financing gap, where the banks and NBFCs have stepped back or are being even encouraged to step back.
Okay. Remind me, Vinayak, is this the structure that used to be used back in the ICICI days? I'm old, but I'm not that old. But is this not exactly what they used to do back then?
See, in a sense, it is similar. There will be many, many additions and alterations to the 1950s and 60s when IDBI was created as an act of parliament, right? Yeah. Remember, while it became very fashionable in the 90s to criticize IDBI, ICICI, IFCI, and its derivatives like SICI and others, India was a capital-starved country after independence. And when the British left, we were so capital-starved that the Planning Commission under Nehruvian times diverted any capital that was available to the capital goods industry and to the industries and to sectors like hydroelectric projects, etc. Indian industrialists did not have capital, and therefore many of the industrial groups that are today world-scale recognized business houses have built their businesses with the capital provided in the 60s and 70s by IDBI, IFCI, ICICI. In those days, we were starved of industrial capital, and therefore the DFIs were plugged in to provide that gap. Today, we are starved of infrastructure capital. So we require a DFI to plug that gap, and we are not the only country. Most emerging markets, Brazil is a prime example like India, as a very, very successful development bank. So does China. So it's something that is important for us to learn from, follow, and tailor to our needs.
Okay. So just to sort of wrap up this part of the conversation, what we are envisaging is not a financial institution in the commercial sense as we know it. This is a more sort of, government priority or national infrastructure priority based institutions, which may or may not function on the usual commercial terms of returns that you know.
Any project that can sustain itself on normal financial terms, commercial terms, is free to go to any of the existing institutions. But if I were to today undertake, let us say, I know it's a controversial one, but just as an example, if India today in a limited manner were to do a river linking project, right, to prevent floods in North Bihar and link up rivers to prevent floods and drought syndrome, which institution will fund it? But it's a national need. Yeah. If today I have to provide 24/7 tap drinking water in a constructive manner across all my 6 lakh villages, how much can the union budget support it? It is not fair. But these are projects which any developing nation coming out of poverty require. Who will fund it? You can't put all your eggs in the union budget and then say, please don't breach the fiscal deficit. I mean, this is ridiculous. So we need an alternative. And this is the big elephant in the room. I'm excited about it. And I hope that the institution takes shape in the manner that we all envisage it to do.
And this is probably what is being reported as a potential infrastructure bank, etc. Right? This is the same thing that is being talked about. Okay. The other side of the story, Vinayak, has always been contracts, infrastructure, ability to sort of implement it within a time-bound fashion, not have contracts being changed willy-nilly by governments that come in, etc. We've seen that very recently, even in states, and in the case of say Amravati, etc. How does one tackle that side of it? Because no matter what this institution is, it is somebody else's money that it's investing, right?
Brilliant question. Get on to my next favorite topic.
Okay.
Most conversations with the media are always about infrastructure financing. People forget that you finance first, the horse comes before the cart, right? The horse is first a project.
Yes. The
cart is the financing. But all discussions are about the cart and people forget about the horse.
You talk to too many people in Bombay, obviously.
Now, please remember that if you are to attract capital for infrastructure development, you need projects. Let me again take you back to the maths. The National Infrastructure Pipeline envisages 20 lakh crores of investment on the ground every year. Means money, expenditure, money actually spent. Shovel-ready projects is the buzzword. 20 lakh. Now, the typical infrastructure project from concept to commissioning requires 4 years. So, to get 20 lakh crores project on the ground every year, you need to start with a funnel of 80 lakh crores, 20 into 4 years. Ask yourself the question, or ask CMI who monitors projects. Does India have 80 lakh crores of ready projects for which in the coming year we can download 20 lakh crores, 1/4 of it? No way, no way. So why isn't there any discussion on creating a bank of projects? Today, the number of big infrastructure projects is very difficult to find compared to the late 2000s, where we had 100,000 megawatts of coal thermal and Bharat National Highway and airports and gas pipelines. Where are the big projects now? There aren't. So, in fact, we need a new institutional mechanism. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say new again, and you'll ask me why can't existing institutions do it. But I'll tell you, we learned a big lesson in 2012 to 14, when all of us from media and industry criticized the UPA government for stalled projects. Remember those discussions when India had close to 17 to 20 lakh crores of stalled projects? The Manmohan Singh government at that point of time created the PMG, Project Management Group, under a very brilliant officer called Anil Swarup. In those 2 years, Anil and his team were able, through a variety of creative measures, to bring down stalled assets to somewhere between 7 to 10 lakh crores, which was credible in 2 years. Now, that was attached to the cabinet secretary and linked to the PMO. I am strongly advocating that if India is to invest in infrastructure, we first require the projects, then the financing. We desperately require now an institutional mechanism, and I would like to suggest a name for it, called the Infrastructure Project Creation Group, linked to the PMO, because that is where the power resides today and is respected, with a bunch of very, very thoroughbred professionals from the bureaucracy and the private sector, under a good administrative leadership. There are many people around who will then have a mandate to create 80 lakh crores of projects by a positive energy, by reaching out to the states, to answer your question, to cut through red tape, to cut through states cancelling contracts, to cut through all the irritations that happen in project development, which are from environment to state support agreement to land acquisition. To cut through the entire maze of project development and creation is a mega challenge for the country, but nobody talks about it. Everybody is about infrastructure financing and what will the budget do. Or even if the budget FM gives you a 20 lakh crore check, where will you put the money? Right? So I am strongly advocating that the twinning, it is a twinning requirement, one of taking bold measures to plug the infrastructure financing gap. Equally importantly is to create a management group called Infrastructure Project Creation Group, which will catalyze and energize this nation into creating, to start with, a mandate of 80 lakh crores worth of infrastructure projects. I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but
no, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I think some smaller issues like sort of, delayed contractual payments, smaller, but I mean, it was played a role in.
Very simple solution to that. We have told the finance ministry, we have made presentations from CII to the FM, PMO, anybody who's willing to listen for the last, I would say I made my first presentation on delayed payments in 2012 to Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee in the PMO, to Professor Rangarajan in PMEAC, and to Montec in Planning Commission. That was the first time delayed payments started. Now 8 years, we are talking the same thing. It's a very simple thing. We are asking the government, create a portal, right? If Larsen & Toubro raises an invoice on NHI, for example, as soon as it raises an invoice, it pays GST. Anyway, the Sarkari system knows that an invoice has been raised. And then companies like L&T or others who are infrastructure players are then required to immediately log in their portal, their invoice into a national portal of public sector payments portal, right? So let us take the month of January. In the month of January, all companies load all the invoices they have raised on governmental systems, right? So on 31st January, across institutions, I have opening stock of all invoices raised in the month of January. So a simple push of a button, and I know that 3 lakh crores of invoices have been raised on NHI, 2 lakh crores on Coal India, 2 lakh crores on railways, whatever. That is the opening stock. Then the finance ministry asks the chairman of that institution, in the month of February, tell me how much of that have you cleared? Then I get the closing stock of February. It's a very simple exercise. Just in IT, just set up a portal and tell every private sector company that whenever you raise an invoice on a government entity, just log your invoice onto that portal. And at the end of the month, ask the concerned institution, has the stock of invoices gone up or gone down? Itna hi karne ka hai. 5 minute ka kaam hai. And it will solve the problem of pending payments. You please propagate this on Bloomberg.
I will do so, sir. 8 years pending. So, hopefully they'll listen to you now. I have 2 more questions before I run out of time. One goes back to the slightly more mundane part of the, first answer that you gave, which was the 8 lakh crore, which is the budgeted, last year's, what was not used and what may come this year. And like you said, spend on the health infrastructure side. These are standard, sort of relatively easier to implement government projects because they're not large power, irrigation, roads, etc. kind of projects. That spend, at least one can hope, will get pushed through in the next year and create the multiplier effect that it would.
I just want to get one. The amount of 4.12 lakh crores that I mentioned is not money. It is the budgetary outlay for this fiscal. 2000.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're lucky, we may even hit it. Now, to answer your question, one of the good things that this government did in the middle of April, May, June and all that is that it unleashed a whole amount of, it allocated close to 2 lakh crores for rural infrastructure in a host of small projects, panchayat building, primary health center, school, minor irrigation, watershed management, water bodies. So that played a big role in keeping rural demand up. Otherwise, where do you think rural demand came from? Okay. So between MNREGA and rural infrastructure, UNREGA and rural infrastructure, such activity was taken and was well appreciated. The question is, they all add up to a small amount. These small projects, they have outlays in terms of hundreds of crores or even less, single digit, double digit. Yeah. But to spend 20 lakh crores, you require a new generation of very large, conceived projects, which are more programs than projects. Like National Highway Bharatmala is a program. It's not a project. Sagarmala is a program, not a project. Renewable energy, so many gigawatts is a program, not a project. So you need to programize and then from a program, take on the projects.
Okay. My last question is on something which will probably not be a budget item, but I still want to ask you about it. It seems like we're getting closer to some sort of new DISCOM scheme again.
Look, it is fairly in the public knowledge that the government has finally made up its mind that after all the tinkering and all the waving of carrots with some minor penalties and all that, there was really no stick in the past. There were only carrots. The sticks were more conceptual and never taken seriously. It has finally got around to the view that the only real solution is privatization. And therefore, it has already embarked on your favorite city, Chandigarh, where your favorite Punjab and Haryana High Court has stuck it down. The Government of India has challenged it in Supreme Court. There is homework being done for Andaman and Dadra, Nagar Haveli and all the union territories, including Pondicherry. So the government is very serious this time about just cutting through all the earlier policy stuff and saying, thank you, privatize. There's a franchising model, there's a licensing model, please privatize. So that is really what is being pushed by the government now. A standard bidding draft SBD, standard bidding document has come out. I have personally done a critique of that in Business Standard. So that's where the action is moving, and it is the right direction.
All right. Finally, to wrap up the conversation, Vinayak, 3 words you want to hear from the FM in the budget. Number 1, DFI.
3 words?
Yes.
I'll use 5.
Okay.
We are creating a DFI.
Okay. 1 thought, 5 words. All right. Hope they're listening to you, Vinayak. Thank you so much for this detailed conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hope you found it useful.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching Bloomberg.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.